Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining my talk. Today, I'll be speaking about developing locally with Firebase UI Emulator. It's very introductory. It's an introductory section to the Firebase UI Emulator. I will go through a few things. And yeah, my name's Peter John. Welcome. And who I am is I'm a freelance mobile engineer. I've been doing Android and iOS for a bit of time. I'm also a Google Developer Expert for Firebase. And these are kind of the tech stacks that I like working on, which is Android, iOS, Firebase, Google Cloud, a little bit of machine learning. And I also have a podcast that speaks about mobile development. And something random about me, oopsie, is that I do some photography when I'm inside the house coding or on a podcast. So this is just a photo that I took. But yeah, enough about me. Let's get into it. So, a quick history lesson about Firebase. So Firebase initially, back in the days, I think it started out in like 2012. That's when I started using it. Before it was acquired by Google, was this product that allowed us to sync data in real time across many devices. So we would have our phones, and we'd be able to connect to this database, and be able to sync data from one device to another. And this was really really great. It helped with prototyping things quite fast, but then also being able to build applications at scale without having to build a three-tier architecture or anything like that. Later on, many people then requested that there should be some kind of like layer where you can access other services if you needed to, and then that's also where Cloud Functions came in. And Firebase obviously has a whole bunch of other products, but these are the two that I'll be focusing on today: the two databases, real-time database and Firestore, and Cloud Functions. So yeah. So if you've ever developed with Firebase, you would have realized that Firebase was one of those products that did everything you wanted to do. So you'd be able to connect to a database, and it was easy to set up and easy to work with. But the problem was is that it always felt like you were always developing online. So you had to develop online. You didn't have like any kind of like developer environment. It felt like you were working in production all the time, which is really really not great. There was also if you had teammates and you're working on something together, and someone had to upload some data to the database, and you're trying to sync something and you think something's not working, and you guys are both connected to the same database, things wouldn't work correctly, and it wasn't really great. And then another thing that a lot of people would say is that they would spend a lot of their free quota that Firebase provides on development, and then when they were actually in production, they would um, they would then have to start paying a lot more money. I mean, obviously, once your app scales to a large audience, you'd end up paying anyway. But I think just for development purposes, you don't kind of want to get through your free quota. So those were a lot of the development environment cons of working with Firebase. So there were like a few hacky solutions for this. So you could create multiple projects. So you could create a developer project, you could create a production project, and then you would just connect to the two projects separately with two different JSON files that Firebase provides to you, and that could work quite nicely. But I mean, that's I still felt like that was a bit of a hack. You still had to connect to both of them online. You had in the real-time database, there was an opportunity for you to stay in the same project, and you could create multiple databases. This was not on the free tier though, so you had to be on the Blaze plan, and then you would be able to create multiple databases. And then you could connect to different databases, and then have a dev environment even for each person if you wanted to, or you could have a dev environment that everybody's working off of. And that kind of like was a small solution. And then you could also just have, in terms of iOS and Android, you could have different package names and bundle IDs, and you could just create different apps per se. to specifically connect to the database, then you'd actually know which app is doing what. So you could have like a dev app, and you could actually follow well what kind of transactions that's making. And these were great, but they felt like you kind of had to put in some effort, and it wasn't kind of like it wasn't a solution to the problem. So then the Firebase emulator came along. But the Firebase emulator has actually been around for a while. So in 2017, I was watching the Firebase Summit, and I was watching this particular video that's on YouTube. You can go check it out. The links below. Uh, they were talking about cloud functions, and then eventually towards the end, they kind of hinted at like, hey, we have this emulator, and they started showing this emulator where you could pretty much use cloud functions locally. But this was not great because it was very command line based. It was very in alpha at the time, but it did work at the end of the day. But it wasn't a great tool to use. It wasn't really easy. It was all command line based with the Firebase CLI, and I don't think a lot of people kind of knew about it just because it was kind of like this alpha hidden feature. But then earlier this year, Firebase decided that they are going to be releasing something new towards the emulator, and this is the Firebase UI Emulator. So this is what we're going to be speaking about today. So the Firebase UI Emulator is an emulator suite that allows us to connect our Android, iOS, or web apps to local versions of databases, our cloud functions, hosting, and even PubSub. These are the few products that are being supported at the moment, and you can pretty much connect your apps to this locally on your machine. And on the right-hand side, well, my right could be your left, you would then see this is kind of what it looks like. So it would spawn a local instance of this, and you'd be able to see all your emulators, and you could go click on them, and you'd see like your databases like you'd see them in the Firebase console. But we'll go through that a little bit later. So what are the benefits of having a UI emulator? So, like I mentioned, offline. So you don't always want to be developing online. Sometimes you might be in a place where you don't have internet at the time, and you kind of just want to be able to fix a bug or something like that, and maybe be able to push the code at a later stage when you get when you get an internet connection. So this is a massive benefit. I think it's something that people have been wanting for a while. So the offline access to databases is really, really cool. Then you can also run end-to-end tests now on your CI. So Firebase emulators do support CI. They have a CI image that can run on any kind of CI, and you can actually write your own end-to-end test now for your Firebase database, for your security rules, for any of that. It's also easy to import and export data. So you can cache data and import it and export data in your database every time you spawn the emulators. It pretty much wipes the database, but you can actually re-import the data that you actually had in there previously, and that makes it quite easy for you to have either a clean database to test certain features, or you could have a database that has data in that you want to then manipulate specific values and stuff to test specific things. I've noticed for myself, it obviously increases my productivity because yes, it's on my local machine and it's really, really easy to work with. You can now also unit test your security rules, so that's also a thing now. And then obviously, you being able to run this thing on your local machine does not contribute to your quota that you might have on maybe your free tier or a different tier that you might be on. So these are quite great benefits to have as part of your Firebase development cycle. So there are limitations though to the Firebase UI emulator, that it doesn't support auth and it doesn't support storage at this moment in time. I think I've heard in the community that Auth especially is like the number one feature for Firebase UI Emulator. So I'm sure the Firebase team is probably listening to the community, and hopefully there will be an auth option at some point. But I mean, this is it doesn't support auth at the moment. So what would happen is that if you had authentication, it would go to the real authentication server, and then from there it would then hit the UI emulators later, once it's starting to do database work. And then again with storage, it's a little bit tricky, also because now it will hit the real storage, and you might not have those things connected to your database. But these products are the ones that are not supported at the moment. Also, not all the triggers for Cloud Functions are supported. So if you had a Cloud Function, as Cloud Functions are supported by the UI Emulator, if you had a Cloud Function and you had a trigger in there for someone that has just registered for your application, those won't trigger because it's going to obviously try and trigger on your real Cloud Function that's running in the console. So just be aware of those limitations when you are playing around with the UI emulator. So something that I would have to say, though, is that the UI emulator shouldn't be hosted as your production environment. And you should instead obviously use the Firebase console. So if you were planning on thinking like, oh my goodness, I have they have this UI emulator and I can just host it myself, that's not a great idea, because obviously the way Google uses this product to scale, and everything else that kind of backs the Firebase products, which is Google Cloud, might not be the same infrastructure that you have, and it might not work as expected. So definitely the UI emulator is a local and test environment, and it shouldn't be used in any kind of production environments. Okay, cool. So let's get started with the UI emulator. So in order for us to use the UI emulator, we need to have Node installed. So you need to have Node version 8 or greater. I think if you're downloading the latest Node version, it might even be version 10. I think the latest version of Node at the moment is 14. So if you just download Node, you should be fine. You need the JDK 1.8. To be honest, I'm not really sure why, but somewhere in there must be some JVM running or some Java code running. So you need JDK version 1.8 or greater in order to run the UI emulator. And then you need the Firebase CLI installed, because this is how you're actually going to install the emulator on your machine. So how we get the UI emulator on our machines is we go to npm, we install Firebase tools. So this will install the Firebase CLI for us, and then from there we will get we will have to log into Firebase. So obviously you'll have a Google account, and you'll log in to Firebase, and this will then pull all your projects and all of those type of things down into your CLI. So you'll be able to see that. Then what you can do is, if you don't have an existing project that you'd actually like to connect the emulator with, for a new project, you can pretty much do Firebase init. It will then give you options to create different projects. So if you want to create a Firestore database, if you want to create a real-time database, want to create Cloud Functions, whatever, you could do this within the CLI. So it will guide you through that. From there, you'll then click a project and all of that. So that will be all good. Then what you need to do, and also inside of that init function, you can also initialize the emulators from there. So you'll find an emulator option. Definitely click that, and then it will install most of the emulator stuff. So then you'll do Firebase init emulators also. That will then download a bunch of dependencies for you, and then from there we can do Firebase emulator start. And what this will do is that it will then start up the emulators that you have chosen previously. So when you do Firebase init emulators, it will ask you which emulators you'd like. So it will say, would you like a Firestore emulator? Would you like a Cloud Function emulator? Would you like a real-time database emulator? Would you like a hosting emulator? any of those options, it will ask you there, and those are the ones that will actually start up once you actually do emulator start. So something that you could do also is that the emulators run on specific ports. So they would run, I think it runs the normal emulator for Firestore runs on 8080. You can see I've changed it to 8090. So inside of your Firebase JSON, if you have anything running on any of these ports that that might be like a Docker container or something like that, is running on one of the ports that is default to Firebase, what will happen is that you can actually go and change the ports to whatever you want to inside your Firebase JSON folder. This is really, really great because I think a lot of people have a whole bunch of other things running on their machine, especially on port 8080. I think it's a very common port. So having Firestore run on 8080 for me was actually an issue. So that's why I changed it to 8090. So this is a place, if you're wondering where how do you change the port, you can literally just change it over here. And once you've actually done this, you'll then see that the ports, the Firebase emulator starts up in your CLI. So I just did emulator start here. You'll see that it goes and looks for a few things, and it starts running the emulator. And you'll see that it will tell you which port it's running on, well, which ones are available, and then it will also tell you where you'd be able to find the actual the emulator suite itself. So if we went to localhost 4001, you'll see something like this. So you can see it says the Firebase UI Emulator suite. There's a big banner at the top that says, remember, this is a local environment and visit the production environment at your project name. And you'll then be able to see the different emulators that are running. So I have a Firestore emulator running over here and a Cloud Functions emulator. All the other ones I decided to not install because I was not using them for this particular project or demo. So how do we interact with this specific emulator? So we've now spawned the emulator up, it's running on our machines, and this is great. But how do we actually interact with it? So it's really, really easy. So interacting with them is literally through how we would interact with the Firebase database on a normal day. Except that we just have to change the endpoints of where our specific application is pointing. So we'll go through that at the moment, but from an Android point of view, iOS and web point of view, it's literally there's like 2 lines of code that you need to change just in order to say I'm using the emulator and I'm changing the endpoints. I'm gonna be showing examples obviously in Android, and I also have an example in iOS that I linked at the end. So if you want to check out for both Android and iOS, you'll see that. And I'm going to be showing you examples for the Firestore emulator and Cloud Functions. So from an Android point of view, so you'll need to, obviously, you probably have this installed, but just something to mention that Firebase has some new dependency, a platform dependency, where you don't actually have to show the version numbers for each of your dependencies of Firebase anymore. That you have a bill of material. And what this will do is it will actually pull all the latest versions of any of the Firebase dependencies. So you can see there I have Firestore and I have Cloud Functions, and I'm pretty much not putting a version number because it will just pull there. So that's just an FYI, but you'll need these dependencies in order to obviously interact with Cloud Functions and to Firestore. So then in Android, some Kotlin code. Obviously, Android's local host inside of the emulator is 10.0.2.2. So that's what you have to create as your host. And then what you can say is Firebase.firestore and then use emulator. And what this will do is it'll pretty much say, okay, cool, I'm going to now, instead of pointing to the production database, the one that's specified in our Google services.json file, it will now point any kind of Firestore request to the emulator. we will then say, cool, we wanna create settings. So what we need to do also is that we need to set persistence to false, because this could actually give us false behavior between how the database is working with the production database versus trying to persist stuff from the UI emulator. So just make sure that you disable that. And then something else that you don't need particularly, but you might need it in some settings, is that you can also disable SSL over here. So remember, Firestore runs on SSL, and now your UI emulator is spawning up on a local machine, which is on HTTPS. So I mean HTTP. So you obviously don't want you don't want that to be an issue. So just to let you know. So here's just a quick demo of what this looks like. So I have a quick demo over here. I'm just going to play this video and I will walk you through it. So over here, I have the emulator itself, and I'm going to log in. So this is using Firebase Auth, and the Firebase Auth is now going to go to the actual server itself, and I'm going to be logging in, and that's great. And it's going to show me some stuff over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start changing some data over here in our local. So you can see at the top over there, it says localhost. And I'm going to change some values from PJ to Firebase is awesome. I think that's what I'm going to say, right? Yeah. And you'll see that now I'm interacting with the local host real-time data, the Firestore database. So you'll just be able to see that everything works exactly as it would in the production database. It looks exactly the same, so it's very familiar to you. And you still have your collections, you still have your documents. You can edit the data, you can clear the data if you want to, and everything is all good. So this is just a simple video just showing that this does work after adding that specific 3 lines of code. So moving on to the cloud functions. So the cloud functions part of it is very simple. So I wrote a very, very simple cloud function. And if you know that Firebase has cloud functions called callable functions, these are the only ones that you can access at the moment because the other ones are trigger-based. So the callable functions are the ones that you can access through HTTP. Firebase also does provide an SDK for this, which is actually what we're going to be using in our Android app that I'll show you next. And yeah, so I've created some text over here that I'm going to pass through from my Android application, and that's where the data that comes in over there. Then I have some data that I just created with some JSON. And so this is actually gonna trigger the actual cloud function, and then I'm just storing that data into our Firestore database under the collection images over here. So this is pretty much a very simple cloud function. It's called say hello, but it doesn't really say hello. I just took some JSON off the internet, and that's kind of what I got. So from an Android perspective, what we need to do here is that, as you saw in the beginning, I had a dependency for cloud functions. So you can access cloud functions through the SDK, and it will actually use your Google services.json to actually know where the endpoint is for this. So you don't have to directly access it through some kind of URL or anything like that. Over here, we have a function that sets up our emulator. We pretty much get an instance of the Firebase functions, and we use the same function that we used previously, which is use emulator. We put the host, which is again going to be the local host, and then obviously the port is different because the cloud function emulator is running on a different port. From there, we then have an add message function that pretty much is then going to use the function and call that specific function, the cloud function itself. I'm passing to the data, which is the call over there, and then I'm going to get some result. And that is me then invoking the function at the bottom. So I'm calling add message, and I'm invoking the specific function. Just something to notice though for Android 9 and above is that if you're running Android 9 and above, so I have Android 11, and at some point my cloud functions weren't working, and I'm like, okay, cool, what's going on? And I realized that if you're on Android 9 and above, you actually have to do network security configurations. So the main thing to see here is that you need to clear, you have to have clear text traffic permitted to true, and then you can also just have certain domains also. And then what it does over there is that inside of my manifest, I then say Android security config, and I actually set it to my security configuration. So this is just an XML file that I created under the res folder, and I added this over here. So in Android 9, Android 9 and above, you have to add this because it uses the HTTP stack, and because it's not HTTPS, it will just kind of like fail. So please don't forget the step, otherwise you might see that your cloud functions might not work. And then just a quick video again on showing the cloud functions part. So I triggered the cloud function on this register button. So once I clicked the register button, the cloud function ran, and it created all that data in the Firestore database, and you saw that the cloud function say hello ran. As you can see, I ran it a few times before recording, so it had some logs over there. So that's the two that I'm going to be showing today, but the UI emulator has a lot more to it. So you can host your website. So if you have Firebase web hosting, you can test that locally too, which is really, really great. You can also do containerization. Firebase has containerized emulator images so that you can run this on your CI, which is really, really nice. And so that helps with like end-to-end testing if you have something like that, or if you have some UI tests and you need to run it against the emulator itself or an actual backend to see if you're getting the right values and all of that. This is also a great tool to use. There's obviously PubSub if you have that with Cloud Function integration. So what's also nice is that if you have Cloud Functions that then call like I showed now, I had a Cloud Function that calls the Firebase Firestore emulator. They just all work in sync. So if it kind of just knows that I'm in an emulator and I'm going to connect to the other emulator, so you don't have to connect the Cloud Function in any way to the Firestore emulator, which is also great. Because that's all handled in the cloud. So you kind of want it to be handled here because you don't want to have any kind of hacks like that. Real-time database interaction, so that also works. And you still can actually connect to external services through your UI emulator. So if you have cloud functions that might be connecting to some kind of machine learning API that's out there, and you kind of want to get some data from there and then bring it back and then show that to the screen, or even just put that into a database or something like that, you can still access that. And I showed that also through the Firebase authentication. So here's just some references that I had. So there's the Firebase Emulator documentation. I have two samples on my GitHub. The one was a fork from a fork that I kind of just added the emulator to. I added the emulator and I added coroutines to Jetpack Compose project. So you can see how it's pretty much working with Jetpack Compose also. So I added flow and coroutines to this specific project so that you can kind of see how that also works with the Firebase database. Then there's the iOS sample that I have that I created over there. Which pretty much does not the same example itself, but it pretty much uses the emulator, so you can actually see how that works. Then pretty much some documentation and some really good talks from the Firebase team that they've given about the emulator itself. definitely go check those out if you're planning on using this. And then thank you so much for having me. Thanks to droidCon, and thanks for listening to my talk. If you have any questions, or if you ever want to get in contact with me, I'm always on Twitter at PJ Apples. Thank you. Cool. So, what are the benefits of using the emulator over the console? So, the benefits of using it over the console is pretty much being able to use it offline, so that you don't actually have to be connected to the Firebase console all the time in order to get requests. Um, and then pretty much free quota, so that you don't actually ever hit your free quota. And it's easy to test stuff. You can also use it, like I mentioned, in your CI/CD. Yeah, just notice that there's no data in my real-time database for the same database in the cloud. How do I get the data from Firestore? Um, so one of the things that I did, I hope this answers your question. One of the things that I did is that I imported the data through my application. I did find that also a little bit like difficult to import, but there are commands. I did find some commands in the documentation that do provide ways for you to import your data. So there are CLI commands. I thought it would actually be inside of the UI itself. But if you go to the documentation in the Firebase emulator, you'll see that there's a few commands that you can run that actually imports the data for you. Cool. I think that's it. Thanks so much.